अस्सलाम वालेकुम डॉक्टर निदा और बाकी सब जो ऑनलाइन है वी आर गोइंग टू स्टार्ट नाउ Mr. Farhan Anwar is with us. He's an assistant professor at social sciences, social development policy program at School of Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences at Habib University, Karachi. Uh, he's originally a civil engineer and he did his master's in urban and regional planning. And he also is a CEO and founder of Urban Collaborative, a consultancy to promote sustainable urban design in Pakistan. He has worked with World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Japanese International Cooperation Agency, World Conservation Union, WWF Pakistan, and other international organizations to promote sustainable designs in urban areas. And he's also the author of Sanitation Strategy for Government of Sindh and an author of Pakistan's National Strategy and Action Plan for the Mangroves of Future Regional Program. He also regularly writes in the Express Tribune and Daily Dawn. He's going to tell us about the social injustice and inequity in the urban design of Karachi. And the thing he's going to discuss is that the policy making in Pakistan, specifically in Karachi, is limited to the interest of the elites, and the majority is being marginalized in the policy making and planning initiatives. And he's going to tell us about the causes, implications of this inequity and injustice. And he's also going to talk about some way outs. So over to you, Farhan sir.
I'd like to thank Dr. Amir for having provided me with this opportunity to which is very close to my heart and something that I have been focusing on for some time, both in my academics and my professional work also. As Fareed has already kind of, given you a brief intro, and also as the title suggests, what I will be talking about today is that the city that I represent here, Karachi, how there is a growing profile of urban inequity and social justice that is developing in this city. What are the key triggers to it, and what are some of the implications that we are facing? And hopefully, in the discussion, maybe we can focus on some, pathways or roadmaps through which we can, move out of this situation. I'll start with a quote by Jane Jacob. Jane Jacob is a very famous urbanist, and people who have been, studying social sciences, urbanism, and all that must be quite aware of her work. In the 60s and 70s, she basically campaigned in the US, Canada, particularly New York, on how, in the modernist period of development in North America, how cities were changing, how, for example, cities and spaces were being commodified, how different, new trends in modern development were compromising the societal makeup of the cities, how, for example, the automobile was reshaping the city, how spaces that were originally used by communities together and, they develop a social capital were being taken over by these new forms of development, expressways, motorways, how spaces that served as markets and neighborhoods were replaced by sanitized boulevards. So things like that. So her work was about how the modern trends in development were reshaping cities in a way that the common man was not finding a space in that. How decision making was happening at a very top heavy level, not at the grassroots level, and how what the implications were in terms of increased social stresses, economic stresses, and environmental stresses within the society. So what she says is cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by it. I start my discussion today and talk today with this quote because it's very relevant to Karachi. Karachi is not a city for all. It is not a city that is created by everybody. It is a city which is growing without any semblance of inclusive or participatory growth, serving the interest of only a few. So this is something which kind of finds the base for the discussion today, and to a number of problems that we face in Karachi that we fail to connect with the key trigger and the key cause of this, situation. Now, so like maybe you. Achha, the way I have kind of structured my discussion today, there are four different parts to it. We'll start with some statistics, defining some key urban parameters in Karachi in terms of how livable Karachi is or how unlivable Karachi is. Then the story behind the story. We see every day in this city, people who are living in the city, every day they face their faces stresses and strains related with various aspects of living, while they're moving on the streets or they're in their home or they're trying to find some public spaces, whatever, you see a crisis around everywhere. So what is the story behind these stories that we face every day? The political economy and public policy interface, for example, is something which is very close to our heart. I also teach public policy, and how, in the absence of a viable public policy framework, a number of problems are emerging, and how it interfaces with the political economy context of Karachi, which is in many ways finds some unique elements to it. And then making some meaning to the public policy and agenda setting landscape in Karachi. Then, once we start then deconstructing the whole framework of social injustice and urban inequity in Karachi, then I'll discuss it at two levels. One is at the macro level, uh, across three-tiered governance framework that we have in Pakistan and where problems lie, which impact then us in this city. And then at the micro scale, the city within the province, various aspects, sectors of development. So we'll kind of just quickly focus on them. And then implications for urban equity and social justice. So that is how kind of like uh, there is something called the something that is brought out by the Economist Intelligence Unit of the Economist magazine on an annual basis, the livability report. About 170 cities in the world are monitored and documented every year, and they have set up five major, parameters through which, they kind of rate and rank these cities in terms of livability. And in 2019, Pakistan was ranked 135 out of 140 cities that were monitored at that time. So here, for example, I have a comparison of Karachi with some cities not coming from the developed West or something, but more closer to our own reality. You have Cairo, you have Dhaka, and these kind of cities, and you will see in terms of the five major, parameters that are used to uh, reflect the livability of a city, Karachi, kind of ranked pretty badly as compared to even these cities also. Now, here is a kind of a report card on these various sectors of development. You have stability, you have healthcare. Moving on, we'll have transportation and mobility, and they have created certain subheads within these parameters also. And you will find against each uh, subtitle words like undesirable, intolerable when it comes to Karachi. So this kind of sets the kind of a context to our discussion today. And it's not just related with the hardcore development sectors in terms of mobility and housing and transportation and water and sanitation, but in terms of uh, also the cultural and environment within the city. Then a few statistics I'll share from a study that was done recently in 2018. And I was part of the team that prepared that for transforming Karachi into a livable and competitive megacity. It was basically this report in which, after a long time, some primary data was generated on Karachi, basically formed as the launch base for a project that is ongoing, Karachi Transformation Strategy Project, which is funded by the World Bank and being executed by the Sindh government, which is looking into finding some pathways and roadmaps through which we can move Karachi to a livability status. So I'll just share some statistics coming out from this report. For example, this is the uh, livability index that they work out, and you will find that uh, uh, it's a bit difficult for me to read from here, but you can see in terms of the diameter of that, circle that is coming up and the placement of it, you will find which are the least livable cities in the world. And Karachi kind of comes right at the left-hand corner there of this graph. And you will find, there are only a few cities which rank less than Karachi in terms of this index fiscal index that works out. And Farid, can I have the, yeah, it's getting a bit. So in the Mercer quality of living survey, you will find, yeah, yeah. So in the right hand side of this slide, you will find this graph here. And Karachi, right at the very end, there are only a few cities that rank lesser than Karachi, Khartoum, Kinshasa, Damascus, mostly in war-torn countries. And there are a number of factors that are considered when you develop the Mercer quality of living survey. For example, Karachi is a city which is horizontally spreading, faced with urban sprawl. And as we move towards designing sustainable cities of the future, the more livable cities of the future, we are going for compact cities. We are discouraging urban sprawl because it leads to a number of complications in terms of provision of infrastructure and services. And it also leads to more segregated cities, less inclusive cities. Karachi, for example, is showing this phenomenon of urban sprawl. And most of the sprawl that is happening is unplanned. Whatever development that is taking place, in many cases, Karachi's rural hinterland is being encroached. That is happening without any planning framework or umbrella. That is, so it's unplanned growth that is happening in Karachi. And new development of land is being carried out independently by various landowning agencies. And I'll come to that in terms of how the uh, ownership and mandate within the city of various, landowning agencies also creates a problem when it comes to, moving towards that livability framework. The lack of spatial planning, and I'll come to that later also because these days nobody is making master plans. We still are making master plans. We are moving towards spatial planning. Spatial planning is more about connecting the various dots within urban development. For example, where mobility planning is directly interfaced and find a synergy with land use planning, things like that. And in Karachi, there is lack of spatial planning. For example, this is a kind of data that was generated and then that was synthesized. We find the distribution of jobs, skilled labor, unskilled labor across Karachi shows a spatial mismatch between the location of jobs and where people live as the city expands. For example, most of the jobs are found within the center of the city, where the city is spreading, and most of the uh, low-skilled workers are living in the other parts of the city. So it brings out a larger understanding within cities where, for example, various uh, development sectors are not interfaced. If you look at, for example, mobility planning, it is now directly connected with land use planning. So this is something that is not happening. I think sorry, sorry for this. Then this is something I take you back about 100 years. And I think this is important for the discussion also. This is a Burgess model. It was developed by Ernest Burgess, who was actually an economist long time back, and he was part of the Chicago group that came up in the United States in the 20th century, and they were behind a number of new forms of development that were happening at that time in terms of, for example, skyscrapers and everything and things like that. And he developed what is called the concentric zone model, where he defined how different social groups are located in an urban area, and where social growth based on the socioeconomic status of household and distance from central area or downtown, so that the land value of the space defines who is living there and what is happening there. And Burgess model is the game given for this model. And concentric zone model or CCD model was developed between 1925 and 29 based on the study on American cities. For example, the value of land, how it is defining who lives there and who works there, for example. And when we were developing this report, the team of the World Bank, we found that there is a kind of resonance to it when we look at Karachi, where income disparity across Karachi, where those with high income live around downtown and the unemployed live on the periphery and in the informal settlement. And I will come to that later, where a critical reason for why we are seeing all these problems in Karachi is that land is being commodified. I'm an urban planner, and in urban planning, a land parcel is considered as a social asset, where whatever you define, whatever land use that you define for that particular parcel of land needs to have some communal benefit coming out. So it's for the people that you are doing. Over a period of time in Karachi, and it's not something that is unique to Karachi, in many other cities of the world, land has been commodified. There's commodification of land that has taken place where the particular land use that you define for that space is related with how much money you can get out of that particular form of development. So this is something that we looked into when we were doing this study. Karachi is losing its competitive. There are a number of reasons for that. But what is important in this location portion that we developed for this study is that which are the sectors that are, kind of becoming more prominent in Karachi? Finance and real estate sector. So again, it is directly related with that, particular form of development that is happening here, where real estate is defining how the city develops. And that is again based on a crisis of governance within the city, and I'll come to that. So in this slide, I think what is important is one, because of a number of reasons, Karachi, which used to be, the still in many ways is the financial hub of Pakistan, but it is losing its competitive edge very rapidly. Why such gloomy statistics? I've only brought out a few. There's not enough time to go through the whole report, but I can share the report with the team here. Now, I personally, as a student of public policy, as a teacher of public policy, I feel that if you go down, because when you look at a city like Karachi, you see problems all around. And then you try to find, the causes for it, who to blame, how to blame, who is doing what. Sometimes you blame the government, sometimes you blame somebody else, there's a lack of empathy of the people, so they are to blame also. So, you come up with a number of reasons to find out, the causes for that case. But at the root of it, is I feel a failure of the state to structure and implement a viable social and political contract with the citizens. Their lack of trust, that lack of a relationship between the society and the state is, I think, at the core of it. And when I talk about that social and political contract, it is directly related with the policy framework that you develop. How, for example, you define the policy arena within the state. How the state is looking at the problems arising within the city, within the state, and how it is coming up with solutions to it, which are based on policy. And policies are then directly related to how they get implemented on ground. So, the people know what the government, for example, are their rights, what are their responsibilities, what are they supposed to get out of as being the citizen of the state. So I think that is a failure that exists in the city. And if you look at the macro construct of it, the reasons behind it, very simply, in Pakistan, we have a three-tiered governance structure. You have the federal, you have the provincial, and you have the local. Right from the very beginning, and this is something this is a crisis that continues to the present day, that we haven't been able to find a good synergy and a balance between the roles, functions, authorities, responsibilities of the various tiers of governance in Pakistan, right from the word. Province is doing a lot of things that the local needs to be doing. Earlier, the federation was doing a lot of things that the province needs to be doing. So we have never really been able to find that kind of a balance that needs to exist. What we needed was basically for the principle of subsidiarity to come in. When we talk about the principle of subsidiarity, it basically the aim of is to guarantee a degree of independence for lower authority in relation to a higher body or local authority in relation to central government, where whichever role and function is best suited at a particular tier of governance, that is where it is placed. For example, if there is a certain function of the state that is best served at the federal level, that is where it needs to be. If there is a function of the state that is best served at the local level, at the grassroots level, where it needs to be. This is something which has never happened here in Pakistan. For example, if we look at the fountainhead of all the policies and regulations and standards and whatever is happening in this country, is the Constitution of Pakistan. And it has had a very troubled history, a very tortured history in Pakistan. And finally, when we had the Constitution, which is still serving, the Constitution of 1973, it was also twice suspended by the military coup. And then amendments have taken place in it. And why I'm going to the Constitution, I understand it will come to you more clearly in the coming slide, where right from the word go, local government was not provided that constitutional protection in the Constitution of Pakistan. It was always that the discretion of the province of how, what kind of a, local governance system they would like to have. And it was only in the year 2010 when we had the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, where a number of functions of the state were transferred from the federation to the province, that we finally came up with this Article 140A. But that in itself is very vague. I mean, whatever the only thing it says is that each province shall, by law, establish a local government system and devolve political, administrative, and financial responsibilities authorities to the elected representatives and elections and all that. But it doesn't go into the detail of it. Even though we have now a constitutional acknowledgement of the local government here, but again, the process has not been identified, and that is why we are still in the course of that. In terms of when the elections of the local government need to happen, and also in terms of and for example, in this province, in this province, we had the Local Government Act in 2013, the most recent one, and from 2013 to 2024, I don't know, 100 amendments have taken place. So when talking about Karachi, why am I focusing so much on the local government here? Because when we talk about the urban, it is understood and a globally recognized practice that urban planning is placed within the local government sphere of governance. So if you have a very abused sphere of governance, the local governance here, as it is in Pakistan, it directly, impacts on the type of cities that you're going to have. For example, why local governance has failed here in this province is that there is a lack of continuity in terms of the legal and administrative architecture. It is very ironic that whenever we have had local governments, it has been during the military rule, whereas local government are considered as the nursery of all politics and everything. So it was only, first in period of President Ayub that we had the basic democratic system. Then in Ziaul's time, we had the 1979 Act, local government system coming up. And then during the time of Musharraf, we had the devolution plan coming up. So it's very ironic. And there are a number of reasons of that for which I would like to go right now. But there has been a continuous lack of continuity in terms of the legal and administrative architecture. Right now, in Karachi, for example, the city government that we have is just worth its name. And in fact, it is a city of many, many millions serving without a functioning city government. So it is a process of continuous decay and degradation that has led us to the, kind of state. There's a continuous overlap and conflict with the provincial tier, and I'll explain it in the coming slides also. There's a lack of recognition of the rising importance of the urban. This is something that is spread across the whole of Pakistan. We just are not realizing the importance of the urban. Right now, in the global sphere, cities are basically trading with each other. Los Angeles trades with Shanghai, for example. Cities are so powerful; they are considered as the engines of growth of a country. But because of political reasons in this country, because the political entities get all their power from the province level, cities have never been able to, grow and, realize their full potential. They have been muzzled. Their growth has been muzzled. And it is something which is relevant all over in Pakistan. In Karachi, there are further complications added to because of the political economy. We are still making master plans. As I said, master plans are dead and buried. They are dinosaurs of the past. As we move towards designing the cities of the future, the sustainable cities of the future, we are going towards spatial plans. We're connecting everything. We're going right down to the grassroots level. For example, the core of a sustainable city of the future is the sustainable neighborhood. We are going back into nostalgia, where we are trying to recreate the neighborhoods of the past, which we have lost. So we are bringing down planning right down to that micro level. Whereas in master plans, what we have is, a number of experts sitting in separate rooms. One is working on housing, one is working on transportation, one is working on solid waste. They prepare the reports, and they are, bundled together, and we come up with a master plan. We are still, doing that. So we have failed to make our processes of planning and policy making inclusive and participatory, and going down to the grassroots level. We are still into the top-heavy mode of planning. In the micro construct, Karachi is a classic case study in a fragmented and segregated city. The fragmentation in Karachi is across various levels. In terms of policy, in terms of the people within the city, they are fragmented along political lines, they are fragmented along ethnic lines, they are fragmented along religious lines. So the fault lines of contestation are, based on ethnicity, they are based on religion, they are based on race. They're based on the socioeconomic status of the people. And in many cases, uh, ethnicities are connecting with political identities also. So it's a very classic case of a fragmented and segregated city, whereas Karachi basically is considered as a mini Pakistan, where people belonging to so many ethnicities and linguistic backgrounds are living here. And people and such cities are very unique. And people, try to celebrate this diversity. And they try to make their cities into something where people from all over the world would like to come and, sit, and someday they're eating some different kind of food, they're going to some different kind of place, they're looking into different cultures and identities, wherein Karachi, all these, all this diversity of Karachi is providing the fault lines of contestation and segregation and conflict. So this is another problem that we are facing. And there are a number of reasons for that. For example, there's a politico-ethnic alignment. I mean, we have PPP, it is now considered as a Sindhi-speaking party, where it's a national party. MQM is Urdu, ANP is Pashto. So these are, a number of, factors that are contributing to this fragmented status within the city, a city which is contested along various lines. The ethnic dimensions of public policy are defining the political dimensions of governance. There is identity politics has, ruled in this city for a long, long time. And there are a number of reasons why, it is then contributing to a breakdown of services and functions and organize and the entities that are related to providing, for example, civic service and in the city. And I'll come to that slide also now. For example, right now, for a long period of time, there has been a contestation between two political parties based on identities and ethnicity. And just in order to have control over institutions of service delivery, we find that those services and entities that needed to be right down at the local level, they are moving to the provincial level. Right now, for example, we have the water entity, which is at the provincial level. The Development Authority of Karachi is now placed in the provincial authority. Similarly, in terms of the building authority. So, this contestation between political entities based on, a particular understanding of political economy states is also contributing to this crisis. Then there are some structural issues also. Karachi is not a city that has not been planned for. It's been an extensively planned for city. But unfortunately, none of the plans have really been, implemented on ground. For example, all the master plans, right from the Greater Karachi plan, I'm talking about post Pakistan, night from 1952 to 2020, none of these master plans got implemented. None of these master plans got legal sanction. So whatever planning that has happened on a discretionary basis and done by, in many cases, a collaboration and a nexus created between political, formal and informal actors. Then in terms of land ownership, Karachi is a city that is divided between various entities, 19 different land owning agencies in Karachi. Cities can be decentralized. In fact, I am a great supporter of decentralized cities, particularly cities the size and scale and complexity of Karachi. But the problem in Karachi is that I'm just giving you the slide to give an idea of land ownership. There is no mechanism, no system, no platform where some kind of coordination can take place between these various entities. They can't be sitting across a table like this and, planning for the city together. Each of these entities will have their own way of understanding the city, planning for the city, developing standards and regulations and for the cities, and how they would like to maintain the city. So again, this is another form of fragmentation and segregation and within the city that gets created, which is more physical in nature. Then there are a number of reasons which any city would be challenged with. Any form of governance would be challenged with. Karachi, for example, has seen various waves of population, of migration. And so it is any government within the world, within any city can be faced with a lot of crises. So some are genuine problems that we face here. And Karachi, for example, this slide kind of gives you an idea because of various reasons, economic reasons, political reasons which are not just local but global in nature. Karachi has faced these various forms of migration over the years. So what happens when we have this kind of a situation? And interestingly, while there's a lot of talk about political and identities and ethnic identities and these kind of things, when we look at who actually loses out, it is not based on ethnicity, rather on class, socioeconomic status. If a Sindhi speaking poor will be suffering equally as a Urdu speaking poor. For example, if you look at housing, it is estimated that over 50% of Karachites live in informal settlements. Many of them are not even authorized settlements, they are illegal settlements. And in terms of how they are increasing, Karachi has an annual growth rate of about 3.5%. But twice that rate, the population increase is happening in Karachi-A. So that's what we are looking at. For example, if we look at standards, so SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, one of the indicator of moving towards sustainability is if you are reducing the number of people living in informal settlements. In Karachi, the population growth is twice in informal settlements as compared to settled places in Karachi. Whereas, and the last low-income housing scheme that the government came up with in Karachi was in the early 70s. So the last 50 years, the government has not been able to provide the people in the city with any low-income affordable housing scheme. Whereas in developed countries, you will find, there are mechanisms for that. For example, in Singapore, more than 80% of the population lives in government housing. In Canada, by law, 30% population needs to be living in affordable housing. In Sydney, very recently, they passed a law where 10% of the housing has to be affordable housing. And compared to those cities, where are we in terms of poverty and in terms of social and economic disparity? Whereas we haven't been able to come up with what is happening, we are coming up with these elitist schemes, high density zones by policy. We have Barrier Town, we have a number of other such schemes coming up. And whatever the people that are living in Karachi-Abadis are face a very uncertain future. Rather than they being upgraded, they being regularized, they being mainstreamed into the city development framework, there are people looking at them how they can get rid of them and come up with their world-class city structures. Disappearing green spaces, for example, normally in a city you need to have 25% green cover. In Karachi, it's hardly 3%. And so I have just a few more slides. Mobility, for example. We did a lot of primary data generation in the mobility sector in Karachi. And I mean, it's for everybody to see. I'll just come to the next slide. I think it will give a clearer idea. For example, private cars carry 21% of the traveling public, whereas public transport, and we don't even have public transport. I mean, even the mini buses that are moving around the city, we call them public transport. They're not public, they're private. We don't even have a public transport. Only very recently we have been coming up with these red and blue buses. Public transport constituting only 5% of the vehicles on the road carries 42% of the traffic public, whereas private cars carry 21% of the traveling public. And the result is the number of passengers competing for a single bus seat in Karachi is 45. And most of the transportation infrastructure that is coming in the city Karachi is, I mean, we are now when we're talking about sustainable cities of the future, we are moving towards cities that are walkable, cities where we are promoting non-motorized transport, walking and bicycling, cars are being discouraged. The whole urban design is changing. We are moving towards compact cities where walkability can become viable, cycling can become viable. Whereas in Karachi, it's becoming more and more of a car-friendly city. The next slide is going to be letting you know about that. And this study was done 2018. 1,000 new vehicles are added to the streets every day. And then who are we planning for? The handicapped don't even exist. If we go to a well-functioning city, no mobility or transportation infrastructure plan can be approved unless it fulfills the requirements of universal access design. That it needs to be accessible to the physically impaired, to the visually impaired. Unless that is there, no plan is going to be approved. What is if you look at the last 10 years, for example, just only the last 10 years, where has all the investment gone in flyovers and underpasses? I mean, if you and me, we have cars, that's great. We'll be reaching a destination in 10 minutes now, where earlier we were reaching in 1 hour. But talk to the person who is a pedestrian, who is on a cycle, who is trying to use a public transport. All those spaces where, you could walk or you could use a bicycle or public transport could run are disappearing. Decreasing access, water is another sector. We don't need to go into the details of that. This slide to let you know in terms of investment in water and sewerage in Karachi. Right now, for example, the water entity in Karachi is a totally financially bankrupt organization. It has no money of its own to invest in any capital investment, for example. And most of the finances it has are going into administrative costs, salaries. So commodification of space. This is, I think, my last slide. There are a number of reasons. I mean, for a 30-minute presentation to go into the complexities of why Karachi is the way it is right now is, I think, pretty much impossible. But I would like to, kind of conclude by saying one is the commodification of space that is happening. I mean, this is something about which a lot has been written. For example, Right to the City, David Harvey, and Lee Corbusier, Henry Lefebvre, and people like that have written a lot about it. How, for example, in capitalist economies, we are coming up with these kind of cities where land is being commoditized, where whatever investment is happening to get a return out of it, and the concepts of social justice, the concepts of communal benefit are disappearing because people find less financial benefits there. So, but all that is changing now, and Karachi, unfortunately, is still faced with this dilemma. Like, for example, if you look at our public spaces, it's all gloom. If you look at the streets, if you look at our parks, if you look at our libraries, it's totally, you see gloom everywhere. Where you see the glamour? In our high-end eateries and in our corporate offices and in our shopping malls and things like that. So that is where all the investment is going. So I think one is that is the driving factor behind all different kind of investments that are happening in this city. How, for example, we are prioritizing housing development, how we are prioritizing mobility, development of mobility infrastructure, and all that. And some people, it's limited, interest groups are finding a benefit out of it, and they are pretty much visible for everyone to see. Policy making is happening in hidden spaces, in invisible spaces. They are not happening in open spaces. People are then trying to come up with claimed spaces. For example, we have these Aurat March and things like that, where people are trying to make themselves heard. So I think I just like to conclude here, and hopefully, if we have some time left for discussion, we can kind of, move this discussion forward and maybe focus a bit more on some particular aspect of what we have discussed in the presentation. Thanks.
So thank you very much for this rather alarming but candid view of our city from the sky. And this is pretty much, I think, the urban landscape across most urban centers of Pakistan and other lower middle income countries. So the floor is now open for questions. Please introduce yourself and then ask a concise question. This is also open for people online who may wish to contribute a question. You can also come online and or just put it in the chat box, whichever is more comfortable.
I'm Arslan Khan. I'm a general surgeon at SIUT. So we can always keep talking about the problems which we face every day, but the way to solution. So I don't see this. I was actually thinking through what will break the dynamic here. But all the stakeholders, because the common people are not stakeholders. This is the way the state is structured. We live in a garrison state in general, and we have these special areas called cantonments. So, and every development that, as you have already talked about, the commodification part, that serves the purpose. So what is going to break the dynamic, and is there a way out?
There's always a way out, but whether that's going to happening here, I don't know. There's always a way out. I mean, like for example, when I teach, we normally talk about various cities where there were these kind of situations, but they got out of it. There are a number of cities where we can take inspiration from. For example, Medellin in Colombia. It was known as the most violent city in the world. It was known as the machine gun city. It was the headquarters of Pablo Escobar, the largest drug baron in the world. Every part of that city was a no-go area. And right now. And that was only 30 years ago, something 30. Now it's a tourist destination. People go there from all over the world to see the urban transformation that is taking place there. And they did it through a very comprehensive process of social urbanism, where they invested in the poor. And there's a long, history, long story to it. Similarly, there are other cities in the world. So you can move out of it. But for that to happen, there has to be a political consensus that needs to take place. I mean, people talk about we need more money, we need more, people, whatever. I mean, in Karachi is a city which many say, runs the country. 60% of the revenue that is generated here in Karachi, for national revenue that is generated. Why then Karachi has to look at, Islamabad for everything, to do here? Why does it have to look at those presidential packages? Karachi has the money. Karachi has the highest literacy rate in Pakistan. So human resources here. Karachi is still, despite everything, the financial hub of Pakistan. The money is here. The problem is that we don't have a political will and a consensus to make the change. And so I say, money is not a problem. Human resource is not a problem. Ideas is not a problem. We can always, create collaboration. But the problem is that there is no political consensus. There is no political will. And unless that happens, unless we rethink our governance framework, for example, if you have people at the top who can make the decisions, who can move things around, if they decide, yes, we want to do that, then we need to come up with a whole new vision for the city. We need to redo the architecture of governance in this city, for example. How, for example, we can move towards more organized decentralization in the city. How we can move towards a different understanding of where the city needs to be. How we can leverage the new economic sectors that are going in the world. For example, green tech, AI, and all that. So we have to come up with very recently, it's not been made public yet, but I led a small team when we developed a vision document for Karachi. It was funded by the World Bank and Sindh government executed it. So we have worked out a number of pathways through which it can happen. And how, for example, we need to undo the governance architecture. For example, we still think, and I'll just talk very, Urdu mein, sarkar sab kuch kar sakta hai, we still have that mindset. Everywhere in the world, it is changing. The government is opening itself to new forms of collaboration, partnership, whether it's involving the community, whether it's the private sector, public-private partnership, whatever. So we need to open it up. We need to open up the governance architecture in the city. We need to leverage the strengths of various, stakeholders, and just rethink the whole governance architecture and framework in the city. It can happen, but the beginning has to come from a political consensus, a decision made right at the top, that we need to be thinking about this city, we need to be thinking about something else other than ourselves. Unless that happens, I'm afraid I see a very bleak future. Yeah.
Thank you. Farhan sahab, that was a very interesting आपने जो अभी टॉक किए. मैं यहाँ बैठी हुई, I was trying to, मैं analogies draw कर रही थी. आप इस वक्त बैठे हुए हैं सेंटर ऑफ बायोमेडिकल एथिक्स में, और हमारा जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है, एक ही सेंटर है राइट नाउ पूरे मुल्क में, कि मेडिकल एथिक्स जो है इतने सारे लोगों में, तो व्हाट कैन द सेंटर डू? एक ही सेंटर है, तो उसमें इट्स एन अपहिल टास्क. एनालॉजी, एंड आई वांट यू टू जस्ट टेल मी इफ यू थिंक इट्स समथिंग दैट्स द सेम. हमारा इशू जो है, सो व्हाट वी ट्राई एंड डू इज कि वी कांट चेंज एवरीथिंग. मेडिकल एथिक्स पढ़ानी चाहिए, फिजिशियंस को बेहतर होना चाहिए. So हमारी पॉलिसी ये है, through our programs we try to seed universities so that यहाँ बाज़ हमारे alumni भी बैठे हुए कि through courses, workshops या even programs, कि अगर हम seed कर दें, गवर्नमेंट कब आएगी जाएगी, यहाँ की तो गवर्नमेंट का तो पता ही नहीं चलता है ना. अभी भी आज आई है, अब पता नहीं कब जाएगी. तो उसके अंदर जो है इस किस्म की, आप, I know you are involved in this, you also have your own office के through आप अपना जो काम करते हैं, is that something feasible? Yes, आपने कहा it has to come from the top. Is that something आप लोग करते हैं that you are trying to do, working from your level?
I think the main reason why I teach is that that's one way for me to maintain my sanity. So okay, you work with young minds, you try to sow the seeds of maybe a different future. But problem is that if we want to save the city, and if we want to reverse the trend of urban decay and degradation in this city, we need to move faster. And because in when we are talking about cities, and when we are talking about the damages that happen within a city, many are such that are irreversible, that are called irreversible damages. And for example, if land use is changed, if you are redefining the land use in all the wrong ways, you can't bring down the whole city and develop it again. So I think if we really want to save this, whatever is left in this city, we need to move faster. I mean, yes, sowing the seeds and everything is okay and all, and that is something that we need to be doing. We need to be creating, institutions of excellence and like bioethics here and everything, and they can, create those larger, branches through which you can, connect with other people. But we need to move faster. The city is going down, and it's going down in a very rapid manner, and the damage that is happening in many cases is irreversible. So yes, uh, nothing wrong with that. We always need to be doing that. But I feel that if we want to, save the city, something needs to happen a lot quicker. I mean, yeah, I mean, this, for example, yes, for example, I'm part of a few projects that are looking into that. Like I'm part of the Karachi Transformation Strategy project that I, talked about in this presentation, where the Sindh government, through funding by World Bank, is looking into investment in the mobility, water sector, urban transportation, public space design, and institutional strengthening also. But you see, I mean, I would like the discussion to become too pessimistic, but in many cases, the state in which we find our institutions right now, to expect something good coming from them, uh, I mean, it's like kicking a dead horse in many cases. So yes, we need to kind of, if you really want to have some dividends coming out of these kind of projects and everything, the enabling space has to be kind of restructured. And unfortunately, over a long period of, decay that has happened in these, for example, if we talk about KMC, we talk about KDA, we talk about Water Board, all these institutions are now just, kind of failing to have a capacity to deliver any good. So we need to kind of redo the damage right from scratch. And for that to happen, we need to have, as I said, and I keep saying, a new architecture of governance. How we are going to be determining policies for the city, how, for example, institutional frameworks are going to be reestablished and restructured. That needs to happen. Because unfortunately, like for example, if we get funding and if we do any project, uh, there is no sustainability to it, because the institutions right now don't have that kind of capacity. Like for example, this is just between for the discussion here, that the major challenge in this, even in this project that we are facing, is of how to sustain some good that is coming out of this investment in this project, for example, in terms of maintenance of spaces that have been developed, sustainability of actions that have been taken. So yeah, it's a difficult space we are working.
Um, Thank you very much. We heard about all these problems many times before also, and we see this decay going on. But the thing that always makes me wonder is the price of real estate in Karachi is still going up, and it's multiplying. if the infrastructure is decaying, if there is no public transportation, no water, no gas, no electricity, nothing, and everything by the day is getting worse, then why is and how are the prices of all the houses, all the plots, flats going up?
Artificial means, for example, this is all speculative investment. For example, a builder will buy, hundreds of acres and just leave it there, and nothing is going to happen. He can wait for another 20 years for something to happen. So that basically impacts the overall, sector in terms of real estate. And then whatever investment people are doing, they're doing it in real estate. There's no other place where you invest your money. Either you buy a plot or an apartment or something like that. So that is, how it is happening. And as I said, there is increasing densification of the city, and whatever investment is happening in housing and commercial development and everything. So, but it's basically artificially driven. It's not something that, and speculative growth, speculative investments coming from large scale real estate developers and all that.
Thank you, Farhan साहब. जो online है, I would like to ask them if they have any questions. They can ask online on the chat, or they can just unmute themselves and ask. But I have a question here, and that is the new urban sprawl that you were talking about. You mentioned Barrier Town, but there are multiple other societies that are close gated communities that are being formed in the northern side of Karachi, and all those societies are close gated, self administered. So what will government do for those societies? There is no, I think they are administered by their own system.
The government loses its mandate. And the mandate of the government becomes weak. You have all these, various forms of development happening. And if we talk about defining, when we define sustainable cities of the future, then gated communities is a complete no-no. And because they lead to segregated growth, they lead to a number of other complications also, they lead to urban sprawl that is happening. So there are a number of reasons why gated communities are discouraged.
But they are sprawling.
I mean, it's basically, it's kind of a nexus that is happening. It's not that they are happening without any government permission or whatever, So yeah, but only a few people are getting the benefit out of it. So it's a nexus that gets created between the bureaucracy, the politician, the real estate developer, the security.
So, but 10 years down the road, if we see something good happening in our city, a good governance structure coming there, so do you think that governance structure will be able to do any good in those gated communities at that time?
As I said, that many of the damages that have been are irreversible. So a lot that has happened in Karachi, has happened, and difficult to kind of turn the clock back. But what we can do is we can try to save whatever is left, and hopefully. For example, I did a study for the World Bank some years back, in which we looked at the rural Karachi and the existential threat that faces right now. And main reason for that existential threat is how the urban is encroaching on the rural. And one way of putting a barrier to that growth is that you define rural land as some place only where rural activities can happen. So that is one suggestion that came out. Karachi has a very natural barrier that we can use. Karachi is rural and Karachi is urban. But that barrier is now being diluted. And so because of unplanned urban growth, so that could have been used. We still can use it. So yeah, I mean, it's what the best we can do out of the situation. Yeah.
So I actually have two questions. So disconnecting questions. So one of the trends that we're seeing we've seen in Karachi over the last couple of years is now, I feel like it's being mirrored in Lahore as well, which is, I think, another upcoming city which is following Karachi's trajectory, right? In terms of more flyovers and bridges and underpasses and then urban sprawling growth. I mean, I think that the first time I went to Lahore, like back in 2000s, and now we're sitting here, and the city has expanded so much, right? And we didn't have that. So, but surprisingly, the government that's also involved with the private investors there, right? With, of course, the military as well, because you have Askari 11 and whatnot, and the military getting involved in housing schemes. And connected to that actually is that the people actually also want this segregation. They want these gated communities because it makes them feel secure, because it gives them a sense of privilege and elitism, which people actually like. So, and I don't know what you think. I mean, I'm just trying to ask your opinions about the fact that एक तो हमारा ये कि आपने कहा कि गवर्नमेंट है हमारी कि जो lack of political will, but I also feel कि हम लोग as individuals as well, and I say that for myself as well, we like somewhat gated communities because it helps us feel secure कि हम लोग outside करें उन लोगों को who really don't हाँ, so I think it's also just not a matter of like the politicians. So how would actually the government actually change this worldview and this perspective, because it's been going on for so long? This is what people desire, you know, they want these killing Askari 11 जैसी Askari या ये मलिक कैंप की तरह communities हो जो सुकून वाली हो, आवाज ना हो उधर और सब कुछ हमें उधर ही मिल जाए.
It's related with the breakdown of civil services within the city, of course, and the only way to, you know, give people that same level of satisfaction within the city is, you know, improve the services, improve security, improve their access to basic services like, you know, water, electricity, housing, employment, education, yeah. So, yeah.
So, but connected to that, people still, for example, I'll give.
Yeah, I mean, for example, if we talk about, this is not something that is unique to Karachi, it's happening in many other parts of the world, it's very common phenomenon. And for example, right now, for example, it started in the US in the post-World War period when they developed all these motorways and, you know, highways and everything. Then, you know, what happened there was this phenomenon of suburban growth, suburbias, they developed. You know, the rich, they took their money and they took their businesses and they moved towards these satellite, you know, so, you know, places, you know, their own little heavens they created. And what that resulted in was that resulted in the decay of the downtown area, the central city area, because the places that were thriving economically and financially and socially suddenly, you know, became centers for drug and crime. And like, for example, Times Square till the late 1980s was considered as a red light area. Nobody used to go there after, you know, midnight or whatever. But they realized the problems that were being created, and they kind of, you know, came up with these ideas of reviving and rejuvenating their downtown and this central city areas and everything. And so change has happened, and there are a number of benefits to that. But yes, you're right. I mean, I'm not saying that people themselves are not all selecting and opting for such, you know.
So, for example, people would still live in, a lot of people would live in DHA despite the fact that there is no gas. And I think it's connected to what Dr. Ali was saying, gas nahi hai, bijli nahi hai hamare paas, lekin hum rahenge usi jagah pe, because they have that this is the elite area. So I don't understand this particular, what makes an area elite, one would think would be accessibility to particular services, but now despite those services not being available that make an area livable, people still choose to live. So that part is, I think, for me at least, and I want to hear your thoughts about it, is that what is going on?
The central area, the more certain areas, they are degrading. For example, just one example, you know, in 2004, the city government came up with this idea of commercialization of roads. 17 major traffic corridors in the city were commercialized. And that was one, I think, if we identify a few major policy decisions that have, you know, kind of defined the city beyond anything, it was that.
Because what happened was that even in the area where I live, it's purely changed PCHs. It used to be a very, very nice, quiet residential area, and now you go there, it's like a mini Manhattan here, with all the problems that come with it. Because what happened was there was urban development, along these roads, alongside the road, commercial development took place, but then it didn't stop there, it stayed inside, and it destroyed the whole area. So, this is happening, these areas are facing these kind of problems, they are degrading, land use is changing, the privacy is not there, security is not there, services are, being hampered because now suddenly you have so many people living there and, access to service. So, people are moving out, I'm not seeing that, and there are pulls and pressures, and suddenly if an area becomes commercialized, the value of their, the dwelling becomes, much higher, and the financial incentive also. There are a number of reasons that are, leading to this kind of problem. And I don't think people in many cases do it, they just are left with no other choices in many cases.
Yeah. So my question is actually linked to what Shadia is saying, and I'm just thinking about it. Pakistan, people in Pakistan would like to have roti, kapda, and makan. And makan is always there. So there's a desire to own a piece of land by everybody. And what you call as urban sprawling, that is having housing beyond the limits of through boundaries. And we don't like to live in flats, because to us, this vertical growth of a city is not what we are tuned to. So does that mean that people of Karachi needs to be educated about what you're talking about? So I don't, so to me, the people don't, so what you're saying is not what people are thinking.
Yeah.
The land ownership is considered one of the prime thing that will make you secure in the city. Right. So does that mean that education has to go to a different level? Example of probably is not very appropriate, but Sialkot is one such example where people did not rely on the government for a particular task. They did whatever they could on their own because they thought this is how it is going to benefit the city. So does that mean that education has to, the efforts have to be on a different level where they're actually involving the real stakeholders?
I mean, you see, one, we are moving towards more compact development. We are trying to, generally, the mantra is that we are moving towards cities, the vertical growth is being promoted. In many cases, it leads to much more environment friendly cities, provided the vertical growth is happening with all the proper environmental and social safeguards in place. That is not happening there.
And also safety and construction.
So, and I think the trend is changing. For example, I did a study many years back in which I compared, PCH's Block 2 area with how Sharfabad, Hyderabad areas been during a period of time. And we found out that the study was done many years ago. We found out that, families are breaking up. For example, you have their children are getting married, they want to move out, they are moving to apartments. So the smaller family units are becoming, the more smaller the family units are becoming, apartment living is becoming more, an optive, choice that people are going for. So that trend is changing, I think. And it's not easy to maintain such big houses and everything. But it's different in many areas. For example, if you go to Federal area or anything, 100 square yard house is now turning into a 6-floor house. Each son gets married, there's another floor added, each son gets married, another floor is added. So it's very different. But I think what happens right now in this city, for example, there are no social safety security nets. People, someone suddenly, finds that he or she has retired. There are no social nets, security nets, financial nets. So they only have to, find the only way they can, secure some kind of a financial, safety net is they own a property or something like that. So that is something there. And it also relates with that larger, what I talked about, that lack of social and political contract that the government has been able to establish with its citizens. And also in terms of lack of investment opportunities that people have, the only place they can think of investing is in property. So that is another reason for that. But I think the trend is changing in terms of people kind of, and then also, you have the financial sector which supports that, house loans are available, banks are there, for example, when they started coming up with these car loans, you may not be able to afford even a single car, but you have 3 cars in your home. So, for example, one of the reasons why cars multiplied in this city many-fold was because of this car loan scheme that came up. So you provide those kind of, and that is another, for example, there's not enough time, but the work that David Harvey and Anil Lefebvre did on Right to the City. So they did on this debt financing. It is called debt financing. That, you have these institutions coming up, these banks and financial institutions, they're giving you money, buy more houses, buy more cars, buy more other property. And so that is called debt financing. And that is how, for example, this capitalist economy works. And then suddenly, we may have the bubble bursting like in 2008, where it was just mortgage financing. At the base of whatever happened was mortgage financing. So that is another part of this capitalist economy, where they develop these institutions which create those debts, and you are caught in them, and
Okay. So you have mentioned in your talk there is a lack of trust between the governance and society. So do you think that, and it will stay as it is, at least what I can see in the next coming, for example, 10 years. So do you think that individual ownership, whether at individual level or the community level, would help in preserving this decay or stopping this decay? I have 2 examples, and I was a part of it. One was the Marriott Road transformed by into a denser hall Rahguzar, and the urban forest initiative. It took 2 years or 3 years, but what they have done, they involved the local community because the mistrust was there, and they make sure that they develop a trust on a certain person, like the architect who's involved in it, and she spent time. There was no fund involved. There was some society which gathered and then helped her out. But eventually, the ownership was taken by the local people. And then, if you have seen that from Marriott Road, what it was a few years back, and now it was just inaugurated a few months back, and it's really transformed, and the people are happy, so they can walk there. It was just polluted with the trash before, and it's now clean like anything.
I think that's useful. In fact, I was part of the team of Yasmin Lari when this whole project started. And yes, I think something that I also try to promote is at least we try to work at our neighborhood levels. Even, for example, in a city like Karachi, suddenly you want to make it into a walkable city, how is it going to happen? So, and if you want to turn it into a more greener city, how is it going to happen? So the pilots will come at neighborhood level, I think. So yes, we can work at neighborhood levels, we can work within, spaces, we can create those models through which, a larger footprint can get created. But the problem is, and again, keep coming back to it, for the city, the size, the scale, the complexity of Karachi can only, function if you have a proper government. I mean, NGOs cannot run this country, or private sector cannot run this city. So it has to be a well-functioning government, which then in collaboration with, for example, community and private sector and NGOs and everything can do all that. Recently, what you are alluding to is relevant if, for example, the government learns from what has happened with Yasmin Lari's project in terms of all. And then it takes that learning and turns it into some kind of a policy template. Like you must have heard of OPP. I'll just take a few more minutes. Orangi Pilot Project. Dr. Amir Khan started it. So the main reason why Dr. Saab, and I am very, very lucky that I had many opportunities of engaging with Dr. Saab, that when Dr. Saab started that project, he did not want to turn it into a consultancy, which unfortunately ultimately became. It was a pilot project of how, for example, we can uplift an informal settlement, a Karachi-A project. And his aim was that the government learns from this pilot and that transforms it into its own policy for informal settlement upgrading. So that the footprint then encompasses the whole city. That is what happens when NGOs do some good work, the government needs to learn from that. He did that in Bangladesh, in the Comilla project, in rural Bangladesh, and it ended up being transformed into becoming the Rural Academy in Bangladesh. It happened there. And that is why you see so much growth that has happened in Bangladesh. Prague project, for example. It all came out of Dr. Saab's work. When in the 1960s, he worked on the Comilla project in East Pakistan. They learned from it. And यहाँ पे हमने Dr. Saab को एक तमाशा बना. And that project, OPP turned into a disaster. And after his death, something else happened. The project that I recently did with my students at Habib University, where I accessed a grant, was where we documented public spaces, parks, multi-purpose community spaces that are being run by communities, that are being run by NGOs, even private sector. And we documented all that learning from these spaces. And we turned it and we transformed that learning into a policy paper. If the government wants to learn from how, for example, a park can function amazingly or a community space can function amazingly, they turn it into their own policy of turning the parks within which are there into their jurisdiction into something like that, or the community spaces that they run into something like that. So that is what needs to happen. So whatever is good is happening at the community level, at the neighborhood level, at an NGO level, needs to be picked up by the government and turned into a policy framework. Otherwise, we just have these isolated, oases of success or whatever, and they won't have the larger footprint that needs to happen in that. So, yeah.
So perhaps if there were more such footprints, and I, as you said, we don't want this to end up being a depressing thing.
Yeah.
और उसमें again वो जो अपना
वर्ल्ड व्यू जो होता है, सो जो डॉक्टर सीमा कह रही हैं, सो उसमें सवाल ये है, यस होपफुली वन डे वो शहर होगी, वो पता नहीं कब होगी. तो अगर if these footprints, yes, if there's sufficient number of them, and if there is enough, जहाँ हम सब जो बैठे हुए हैं, I mean, we are the relatively fortunate people. तो एक individual का जो है, Dr. Seema, I think that's what you were talking about, the individuals, there needs to be more effort, I think, also, because...
That's very right. I think that's a good point to conclude this workshop also, that one way of change can also happen from grassroots activism. When, for example, what you are saying, it turns in, and as Dr. Saab is saying, that all these kind of activities and these demands and actions and advocacy reaches a certain critical threshold where the government feels, okay, now we have to change, we have to do something. So that is another way of things happening, and that is where, yes, good networking between community-based organizations, working together rather than, at cross purposes, can, create that kind of a, critical threshold of public activism and advocacy and demand for change, and just can, move things.
because otherwise it becomes self-emphasizing. जो हम all of us we do कि यहाँ कुछ नहीं होता है, etc. There's truth to it, but is there a counter thing to it through exactly जो आप कहते a little more awareness?
हम हमारे यहाँ नहीं होता, हमने सोचना समझना छोड़ दिया है. बाहर मुल्कों में आप देखें यंग लोग खड़े होते हैं, नई मूवमेंट्स होती हैं, लेट 60s का पीरियड है, 70s का, ये सारी जो चेंजेस आई हैं ये स्ट्रीट एक्टिविज्म के थ्रू आई हैं.
Yeah. Well, Farhan Saab, I would have actually drifted towards a more pessimistic note, but Dr. Wasam के optimism के सामने I surrender, and जी बिल्कुल you are absolutely, so I see light, and keyword जो आपने लिया, yes बिल्कुल I'm blinding light, so I'm commodification का बड़ा एक key aspect है आपका इसका, but when a certain plot can become a commodity, is looked at as a commodity and a business opportunity, तो वहाँ वो एक खानदान क्यों बसे, तेरा क्यों ना बसे?
Land, instead of being considered as a social asset, turns into a financial.
Yes. So इसके लिए एक political will, and political will लोगों से आती है, वो political will को मजबूत होने की जरूरत है, and we've experienced how political will can be broken and also built, and we are hoping that we will be able to build it again. So on that happy and positive note, yes.
कोई और मुल्क है जिसने एक बंदे की यानी वर्दी उतरवा दी, जिसने कहा था ये मेरे स्किन,
जी 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 डॉक्टर सो उस पे उधर तक नहीं जाते बिकॉज लेट्स नॉट गो टू गो इन दैट डायरेक्शन बट आई थिंक नहीं आपको काफी है किरदार ही काफी था सो बट ऑन दैट positive sort of a note. I think it was very useful, very informative and disturbing session. मगर जरूरी होता है जोड़ना conscience को to look at reality and how it is shaping and how we can possibly help and contribute. चाहे वो एक सड़क हो, एक छोटा सा urban forest हो, उसको कैसे उसको expand किया सकते हैं. Everybody has to play a role. I think that's an important thing कि आप जिस तरह से आपका काम है कि आप एक classroom के अंदर उनको awareness दे रहे हैं and then you're moving towards policy papers. Of course, it's the political leadership that has to take up those policy papers and then implement them. So hopefully we'll move in that direction, inshallah. So thank you very much for people who are online and people over here for this important event. Thank you, sir.